But we'll jump right into what we're actually going to be talking about today, the 22B. So the 22, I encourage everybody, once we're done with this meeting, to resort to the forms manual. If you don't know what a forms manual is, you should know. Most of the forms in the MLS, the attorneys who wrote the forms also wrote manuals on how to use it. They define the terms and they explain, what forms to use for certain notices and so on. So it's really important. So like this is a 22B forms manual. It starts with 2 pages explaining the forms manual, and then it goes to 22B. So I'm just going to go through this line by line, and the reason we're doing this today is because the 22B, just like most of the other forms, but maybe a little more so, it's very important to follow the timeline specifically, because if you miss a timeline, your buyer could be left totally hanging, and their earnest money could be forfeit. So that's why this meeting is so important. So I'm going to go through this, but as always, I want this to be open forum. If you guys have anything to add or any questions, please just interrupt me and speak up. Okay, so starting at paragraph 1, this is where you're going to put the property address of the home the buyer is selling, right? So I guess let's take even a further step back. This is a form you use if the buyer needs to sell the property that they're currently living in, or sell another property in order to purchase the property that they're writing an offer on. So you're going to use a 22B with all the other addendums, 22A, 22B, 22D, 22K, etc. So this is an additional form.
Isaac, can I add something? We would advise, we talked about this at another time, but Isaac and I would advise that you do not use this form unless you have read it and understand what it means and what goes with it.
And watch this video. If you're watching this at a later time, this video will hopefully cover all the questions. So yes, thank you for saying that. It's a complicated form, so it's really important to understand it completely. So anyways, paragraph 1, you put the address of the property that they're selling. That's pretty self-explanatory. Line 7, this is a timeline, and this timeline is 45 days if left blank. This is something that is often confused. It says the agreement is contingent on the buyer selling the property on or before 45 days. Really important. That's not the property being sold in 45 days. It's pending. For the purposes of this addendum, that timeline, selling the buyer's property means pending. It does not mean sold and closed. Okay, so that's the first timeline. Line number 10 is saying the property has to be listed within 5 days of mutual acceptance. So the buyer who has to sell their home, so they're also going to be a seller, your client, the buyer, writes this offer and it gets accepted today, which is Tuesday the 21st. The buyer, who is also your seller, is going to be has to have the property listed on the MLS within 5 business days. And remember, computation of time still applies. Anything less than 6 days does not include weekends and holidays. So that means it has to be listed by the following Tuesday. It can be sooner, but it has to be on the market by the following Tuesday. Okay. One interesting thing about this form is this 5 days here is not a blank. That's kind of weird. I don't like, I think it's very odd that the attorneys who wrote this didn't have this as a blank. So if a seller needs more time, they could ask for it. So I talked to Sarah about this, and I don't love what I'm about to say, but because it's a frequently asked question, people say, can I cross that out and put 10, or can I cross it out and put 3 to make it look a little more attractive, or whatever the case. Here's my answer. The MLS has stated very clearly that you are not supposed to cross out anything on their templated forms. There are blank addendums and blank other boxes in certain addendums that you can put in stipulations, but you're not supposed to cross anything else. So I'm going to skip to the end of the 22B and say, here's an other box. This is a blank field that you could, in my opinion, say something to the effect of, and please talk to me before doing this, because we want to make sure we're just filling in blanks to the best of our ability and not handwriting too much. But you can say something to the effect of, according to paragraph 1, line 10, buyer has 10 days after mutual acceptance to list the property. Something to that effect. So anyways, I want to be clear about that you should not cross this off and put in 10 days right above it. If you are really wanting to do this, I would advise that you put it here on the other section, paragraph 8 of the Form 22B. Okay, so moving on to paragraph 2. The buyer, who's also your seller, it's kind of confusing. The buyer, who is now the seller, can accept any offer on their home, right? Except if they accept, right here it says a contingent offer, meaning an offer from another buyer who is also contingent on selling their home, or an offer that closes within under 30 days or over 60 days. So that I feel like I just rambled. Very simply, if you're accepting an offer that's going to close that states that it's going to close in less than 30 days or more than 60 days, or you're accepting or you want to accept an offer that it has a 22B, it's contingent on the sale of another property, then you must get the seller's permission to do so in writing. You can't just call the broker and say, you good? You got to actually get it in writing. So in order to, we're going to hop around from form to form here, because I think that's the only way to really do this. But in order,
does that also apply? That also applies to a 22Q, right?
Correct. I don't.
So that's contingent also.
I don't know where it says that, but I talked to an attorney at the MLS a while ago who said that. So that's my understanding. Yes. Okay, so the form you would use, so again, I'm the buyer's broker and I'm also the seller's broker now. So now, because the buyer and the seller are the same person. And so now I'm going to, I got an offer. Let's say, we got one offer, so we don't really have a lot of choices, from a contingent buyer, another buyer who also has to sell their home. What you do is you use the form 90K. So the form 90K is a notice specifically adjacent to the form 22B. And we're going to talk about this form later, so you don't have to read all this right now. Oh, no. Oh, God, I'm getting confused. It's the 90L, huh? That's how I messed it up, guys. Sorry, it's the 90L that you use. 90K is for a different one. Here we go. Okay, the 90L, you would say, you would send this to the seller with a copy of the offer that you got. And it says seller's notice of consent delayed closing, or you'd say seller's notice of consent to a second contingent sale. And then to answer your question, here's the answer to your question, Sarah. Seller's notice of consent to a pending sale, seller's notice of consent to an extended closing, et cetera, et cetera. Anyways, if you get an offer that is not standard between the 30 to 60 days, and it's not or it's contingent on the sale of another property, you would then send that offer and the 90L to the original seller. By that, obviously, I mean the listing broker, and get the seller's consent in writing. They have to sign this, that yes, we are giving you permission to do that. So back to the Form 22B, it then says here, if the buyer accepts any such offer without the seller's written consent, seller shall have 3 days to terminate this agreement if they want to. So very important, obviously, to not mess that up. Okay. Any questions about that? I know that was a lot, and I can't, I prepared for this meeting, but it's hard. I end up rambling a lot of the time because it's like you're just kind of figuring it out as you go. But does that all make sense to everybody?
Isaac, can I throw something in there on the 90L? Can you go back?
Yes.
So in this bottom section where it's consent to extend closing, correct me if I'm wrong, but you would need to send this under circumstances other than receiving a second contingency, right? If you're needing to extend, you have to get the consent of the first transaction, the first sellers. Is that right?
Seller hereby gives notice the seller's consent to the sale of the contingent property pursuant to which provides. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So you gotta ask the people who are waiting on you to sell your house before you extend the contract to sell your house.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. This, again, like this is just pointing out that this is a really complicated form. So again, if you're watching this at a later time, please watch this whole video because we're trying to make it so people don't make mistakes that affect their buyers or sellers. So moving on, my video keeps turning off. I don't know what's happening. Okay, moving on, back to the 22B. Okay, paragraph 3 is really pretty much the same as the 22A paragraph 1. This is saying that the buyer has, if they are obtaining financing to purchase so they have to sell their home, but after they sell their home, I mean, simultaneously they are getting financing to buy the property. Man, I don't know why this is so hard to like say. Okay, so they're also getting financing. This is saying you have two options. This buyer has 5 days after mutual acceptance to apply for the loan. Again, this is just like paragraph 1, 22A, or they have 5 days after the sale contingency is satisfied to apply for a loan. And so essentially, just like the 22A, it's just saying that you have 5 days, if left blank, to apply for a loan and pick a lender and submit a pre-approval for the specific property to the buyer, either after mutual acceptance or mutual acceptance on the home you are selling, either one. And you just select the box. Really important. Everything in the 22B, there's going to be other places where this is applicable, supersedes the other addendums. Do you agree with that, correct, Sarah? Like, so this, yes. So you wouldn't, so whatever it says in 22A, because you're also going to have a 22A in your offer, it is, whatever's in that blank would be different from, it would be irrelevant in comparison to what's in this. This supersedes the 22A as far as timelines go. Okay,
correct.
Cool.
It supersedes all timelines.
Correct. Yeah.
That's what it says. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, perfect. So paragraph 4 is saying if the property remains on the market. So that's referring to line 8. That's 45 days to go pending. So I'm going to actually just read this one out loud. Seller may keep the property on the market in the no, I'm sorry. Oh my God. I got mixed up. Sorry, guys. No, this is a different. Paragraph 4 is saying seller may keep the property on the market in the contingent status. So unlike when you get an offer that isn't contingent on the buyer selling their home, in that case, you just mark it as pending or pending inspection. In this case, you're going to have it be contingent, and you want it contingent because contingent is telling all other buyers out there, hey, we're kind of pending, but we're not really pending, because you can still come view the home and you can write offers on the home. And do the following. You know, I just noticed, Sarah, sorry, I just got distracted. It says seller may keep the property on the market in the contingent status. I've never actually noticed that before this meeting. So that's interesting, because if you had a seller who, let's say, was just like, I'm exhausted, I'm done, I don't want any more showings, I suppose you could have it as pending. I'm going to put a big asterisk there and say, I just noticed that for the first time. I have not talked to an attorney about that, but that's how I interpret that. Would you agree with that, Sarah?
Yeah. That's what it looks like it's saying, that it's optional. And sometimes you don't want to do bumps and all that because it's really complicated. So I suppose your contingent buyer could choose not to
or
keep
it.
Oh, your seller, I'm sorry. The first seller could choose not to go through all that. Yeah. I agree with you.
My advice, what's in the best interest of the seller, definitely put it as contingent, because you might have somebody else who's coming in who needs to buy a home quick. They love your home and they write an offer that's even better than the offer you have, and they can close in 2 weeks. It's like, yeah, absolutely put it as contingent. So that'd be my advice, but I just thought that was interesting. So I thought I'd put that out. So what this is saying is when you go pending, it is pending, but you can mark it as contingent in the MLS. So now anybody who's looking at homes that are active and contingent will see, oh, well, this home is technically still available. And then another buyer can come, write an offer on the home, and the seller can accept that offer. But when they accept the offer, there is a bump period. So that is 5 days if left blank. That's line 35 of paragraph 4. And it says, and that's, so how that works is the seller submits a form 44 to the buyer, and it's a notice. It only needs to be signed by the seller. It says seller gives notice that the seller has accepted another offer to purchase the property. And unless the buyer gives notice before the expiration of the bump period, 5 days if left blank, that the buyer has satisfied or waived the contingency, then earnest money will be refunded to the buyer and it will terminate and they'll move on to the next buyer. Okay, so that's really important. And here's how it looks on the buyer side. So I'm flipping from seller to buyer, from seller to buyer. So that's what the seller sends if they get another offer. And then what the buyer would send back is a form 46. So form 46, there are 3 options. The buyer can say, hey, we sold our property in those five times. And by sold, again, sold means pending. It doesn't mean closed, it means sold. It means pending. Oh my God. So you can say, all good, we just went pending, we're good. You can say, we haven't sold the property, but we're confident that we will sell the property. And so we're waiving our contingency. Here's a very, very important thing. Buyer understands that by waiving this contingency, buyer waives all other contingencies in this agreement, including the inspection, financing, etc. Point being, box 2, very risky. If the buyer, is not able to now sell their home, then or not able to get their financing in order or anything like that, and they need to back out, they lose their earnest money. So that's really, really important. So don't check that box lightly in this situation. And then the third option is, hey, it's been 5 days and we haven't sold our home, so we're terminating, buyer gets our earnest money back. That's the third box. It's just a notice. Yep, been 5 days. We still can't sell our home. Best of luck. We're done. So
5 days since you sent the bump notice.
Correct. Since the
not
bump
the 5 days for listing or anything else. I just wanted to make that clear because there's a couple of 5-day periods.
I'm very glad you said that. Yes. And again, I'm sorry, computation time is so important. So you get the form 44 today from the seller saying we're bumping you, and today is a Tuesday. So Tuesday doesn't count. It's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, skip Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So by 9 p.m. the following Tuesday is when you would have to do one of those 3 options. Okay. If you represent a seller, I just want to say, if you think you have the negotiating power to do so, I think it would be wise to counter this to a lower number than 5 days, right? If you get another offer and it's a good offer and you want to bump the other buyer, I don't want to have to wait 5 days. I want to wait more like 3. Not telling you to do that. I'm saying that's, if you think you can negotiate that, I would. 5 days is a lot of time. And if it's a really good offer, that would really suck, right? If you're pending with a contingent buyer at $500,000 and then you get a $515,000 cash offer that can close in 2 weeks, it's like, dang, they have 5 days. I want them to not sell their home so badly. So if you change that bump period to a lower time, that could be beneficial to your seller. Okay, moving on. We're getting through this, guys. Paragraph 5, contingency satisfied. This says buyer shall give notice to the seller within 2 days of entering into an agreement to sell the buyer's property. Buyer's notice shall include a complete copy of the purchase and sale agreement, really important. The sale of the property shall close 3 days. The sale of this property, the first one, shall close within 3 days after the closing of the buyer's property, who's the seller. So tough to talk about. I didn't anticipate this being so hard.
Maybe we should give them a name. Maybe it's like the Smiths and the Jones.
Okay, start over. We're gonna start the video. Let me explain 22. No, just kidding. But so, anyways, the way you give notice is the 90K. So there are 2 notices. The 90L is where you would say, hey, we want to accept an offer, but it's contingent on another sale. So it's not this one. Now you're just notifying the seller. The seller doesn't have to agree to this, but you're saying, buyer's property sold, again, sold equals pending, and the contingency is satisfied, and you have to give that to the seller within 2 days. Seller's notice first. I want to read something really quick, just make sure I'm not missing something. Okay, and then the seller has to give notice if they've enacted the bump. Seller hereby gives notice to the second buyer that the first buyer responded to the bump and satisfied or waived the first buyer's sale. So that's saying that the seller, you have to give notice to the first, if there was a second offer that came in and you're bumping them, you have to then notify that buyer, hey, sorry, the other buyer came through and your offer is hereby terminated. I don't know I don't know what the right terminology is there. Yeah, terminated. There it is. Look at that. Okay. Anything I'm missing there, Sarah? Do you think that covered it? Does anybody have questions about that? I know that's a ton of information.
I can't think of anything else. Just so the other items on here too are that you would use this 90K for. As you can see, if you read it, is failure to close and termination, failure to close and reinstatement, and failure to close and waiver, and then just waiver. So you could, in some circumstances, use this one. If there's no bump, you're going to use this one as the representative of the buyer to notify the sellers of the things that you would use the 46, 44, the bump notice one for the buyer, the seller. This is very difficult to talk about because, you know, half the people are the same people.
Well, and that's actually a really good point to say. The only reason Sarah and I know this, it's not because we've like sat down and talked with a bunch of attorneys. I've had a few times I've talked to the attorney at the MLS to get clarification on a couple things. But the good news is everything we're telling you is in the forms and the forms manuals. Like we're not pulling this out of thin air. This is all written here very carefully in the forms manuals and very well explained. So if I'm not explaining, if what I'm saying doesn't really make sense, just read the forms and then call me and we can discuss it and I can kind of explain it hopefully better than I'm doing right now. Okay, we're almost done here. Okay, paragraph 6. This is saying this is what happens if the buyer's property, if you fail to go pending on the buyer's property, okay? So buyer shall give notice to the seller within 2 days of learning that the buyer's sale of the property has failed. So, sorry, I misspoke again. So this is actually saying the buyer, the original buyer, now sells their home to another buyer, and now that buyer terminates for one reason or another. They back out because of the inspection or any other reason. The buyer has 2 days of learning that the sale of the buyer's property has failed to notify the seller. You will notify the seller using, again, the 90K. That's what this one is, failure to close and termination or failure to close and reinstatement. So I'm going to talk about that. So it's saying if that happens still within that 40-day timeline, and by that I mean this timeline right here, paragraph 1, line 8, if we're still within 40 days of the original mutual acceptance, then it will automatically be reinstated. But now you have less time probably, right? It's been 20 days, now you really only have 15 days to go pending again. B, it terminates if that timeline has passed. So now it's been over 45 days, and now the deal terminates because that deal fell through and the timeline has passed. C, the buyer can waive the buyer, if the timeline has passed, the buyer can waive their 22B. So again, you're going to use the 90K for that. I'm going to go back to this because it's really important. This is saying buyer has not accepted an offer, or no. Failure to close and waiver. Buyer hereby gives notice that the sale of the buyer's property has failed or will fail to close. However, buyer waives their contingency, blah, 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 blah. Buyer understands that by waiving the contingency, buyer waives all other contingencies. So again, if you ever waive the 22B, this is really important, maybe the biggest takeaway of this whole meeting. If you ever waive the 22B, you are not just waiving the 22B, you're waiving all your other contingencies. So you better be really freaking confident if you do that.
Isaac, would that mean that if you had agreed to something on the 35R, the inspection, and then now you've waived it and let's say the work's not done yet, could the seller theoretically say, we're not going to do this? Or is this just hire a lawyer situation?
I would disagree. I would say no. Okay, so let me make sure what you asked is clear. So Sarah's question, great question, is what if you've already done an inspection? Okay, original buyer, they're contingent on selling their home, so they're working on selling their home. In the meantime, they do an inspection of the home that they originally wrote the offer on, and they say, and they agree with the seller that X, Y, and Z are going to be repaired on the home, and now the inspection is satisfied. Okay, well, they just then they waive their contingencies. Yes, you're waiving your contingencies. However, we have a signed addendum by the buyer and the seller agreeing that these repairs are going to be done. And that agreement is not null and void. I feel very confident that's the case, Sarah. Would you agree with that?
Yes, that is my understanding of things.
Yep. Okay, cool. Line 7 and paragraph 7 is saying the closing date set forth in this addendum shall supersede the closing date set forth in the Form 21. So that again is going back to paragraph 5. It's saying this property will close within 3 days of closing the home that they're selling. So when you're writing a contingent offer on the Form 21, you can leave the closing date blank, or what I like to do is I just mark it up and say C22B. Because you're not going to actually put a closing date. The closing date is, we don't know what the closing date is going to be because it's specific to when the buyer's home closes. And it's within 3 days of that. So that's just reiterating that. And then there's the other box that I can't think of another thing that I'd put in the other box. I'm sure there are other items. But again, I could see someone using that to adjust this timeline here that doesn't have a blank. Okay, so that's the Form 22B. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Just before we wrap up, I want to go over the 22Q because it's a parallel form. So again, here's the 22Q. There's a forms manual. This form is way more simple. So this is saying, yes, ma'am.
After this, can I list some, or before you do this, probably, can I mention
Please.
a couple of things you could do instead of the 22B?
Yes.
Okay, so you can list the other property first, of course, obviously. And then another thing is to have your buyer inquire about a branch loan, which would, bridge. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, a bridge loan that would bridge the gap there. I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. So yeah, what Sarah's saying is they're starting to come back in a changing market, bridge loans. And how a bridge loan works is it's a lender saying, yeah, you don't qualify for 2 mortgage payments, but contingent offers are complicated. So we'll give you a loan for this home, even though you still need to sell the home, but you don't need to be contingent on selling the home. So you have a little more time to do so. Talk to your lender about that. Anything else, Sarah?
No, those are the 2 that I know of. And then it's always good if you know you're going to be using this 22B, you should be doing everything you can to get the other property ready to list, because 5 days is a really short turnaround time.
We lost you, Sarah.
Okay,
I'm going to move on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, I don't know what happened. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, we just all froze. I was like, is my internet?
I don't know. I don't know what happened.
I think we're good now. Continue.
The joys of using Zoom. Okay, so on to the 22Q. This form's much more simple. This is saying I'm a buyer and I want to write an offer on a property, and I have a home that I have to sell, but it's already pending. Instead of the 22B, you're going to use the 22Q, much more simple. It says this agreement is contingent on closing the buyer's property. Here's the address, and here's the purchase and sale, and you're going to include the purchase and sale with your offer to show that it is pending. And then it says a lot of the same thing. Buyer may not extend the closing date of the pending sale without the seller's written consent. Again, you'll want to use the 90L on that one. If through no fault of the buyer, the pending sale does not timely close, the agreement shall terminate and the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. If the sale fails, then the buyer must give notice to the seller within 2 days. Such notice must be given regardless of whether the buyer chooses to proceed with the agreement. If buyer does not timely give notice, then the buyer shall be in default. And my understanding of default is they would lose their earnest money. And then buyer's waiver of this contingency constitute a waiver of all other contingencies. They reiterate that over and over and over again. Okay. I got a question for you, Sarah. If you write an offer with the 22Q and the first sale the sale falls through, do you then need to add a 22B to the contract? We should have talked about this ahead of time.
I sure should have. I don't actually know. I would assume that you would just, depending on what you're able to do. Well, wouldn't that be where you'd use one of those like failure to close, do you think?
Yeah, but it talks about pursuant to 22B. So buyer's failure to close and termination failures to close. And so it says buyer hereby gives notice that the sale of the buyer's property has failed or will fail. The contingency of the buyer's property 22B is reinstated, but there is no 22B.
Well, maybe keep going and I'll go look at the manual and see if there's anything.
Well, that's about all I have. So yeah, go ahead and look at the manual. I think the fact that Sarah and I are struggling as we're talking is, again, all the more reason to really don't hesitate to call me if you're working through a 22Q and or a 22B, and we'll work through this together and read it and make sure we're following the timelines exactly, because we want to. I mean, I know I don't need to say this, but like the important thing about these forms is that if you do something incorrect, it can cost your buyer their earnest money. And if it's your fault, they can sue you for their earnest money. So it could literally cost you thousands of dollars if you make a mistake. So that's why this is so important. I'm not trying to scare people. We're here to help you work through these complicated addendums. And so, please lean on us whenever you need it. But the reason I'm really hammering this home is because the stakes are very high. So,
okay, I found an answer.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so there's like a ABC situation. Pending sale closing date. Buyer may not extend the closing of the pending sale without consent. So that's important. And then failure to close sale of pending property or waive contingency. Sorry, my screen's, I wish I could share this. If buyer fails to close the pending sale through no fault of buyers, and buyer does not waive the contingencies, the agreement terminates and buyer is entitled to earnest money. And then D, waiver of contingency without sold pending property. So that would be if you can waive your contingencies, and it's the same as all the other times where it waives all the contingencies. And then notice of failure to sale, if pending sale fails to close through no fault of buyers, buyer must notify seller within 2 days.
So I'm going to translate. The default, if you use the 22Q, if the buyer for the home that you're selling, so you wrote an offer with the 22Q, you're the buyer, and now you're the seller. If that buyer falls through, then the default is that the deal terminates and you, the buyer, get your earnest money back. So how I would interpret that, and Sarah, I'd love to hear your thoughts if you disagree or you want to add to this, is you can, at that point, change the contract. You can say, hey, instead of terminating, can we adjust the Form 21, cross out the 22Q, and add a 22B, and have the buyer and seller initial it? And now we're just changing it from a 22Q to a 22B. Can everybody agree to that and move on? And move on with a 22B. That's how I would interpret that. Would you agree with that, Sarah?
Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't negotiate it that way, as well as sorry, I was just reading again. Yeah, I don't see any reason why you couldn't switch to that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the answer to the question. So if the 22Q falls through because the buyer falls through, then the deal is going to be terminated and the buyer gets their earnest money back. But if everybody wants to agree to it, we can cross out the 22Q, add a 22B, and we're back in business. So that's everything, guys. That was that's a very, very complicated office meeting, and I don't feel like I did a great job. I kind of wish I could do this one again.
Maybe we'll do it again later and just record it.
I know we really should, because I feel like there's things I would have said better, but I hope that was helpful. Does anybody have any questions about any of this?
No questions, other than I think we are going to see more contingencies coming up with the way the market's headed. Just like we did like 3 or 4 years ago, contingencies were not that uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
No, I will say, I mean, Sarah and I review all the files that come in the office, and I'm seeing probably close to 5 to 10% of deals in our office are contingent sales, whereas the past year's probably been like 1 out of 50. Yeah, that's about right, like 1 a month maybe, because we do about 50 deals as an office a month. And now we're seeing 2 to 3 per month. Yeah, so I would say I'm about spot on with that. So it's definitely become more prevalent, and it's going to become even more prevalent because for a few reasons. Sorry, I just want to say a few things. Like, so interest rates have gone up. So somebody who could have maybe qualified for both home payments wouldn't need a 22B. Well, now they can't because their payment's so much higher. So they need to sell the home. So that's one reason. Another reason is people who wanted to sell their home and buy a home just didn't. I mean, they were just like, well, I'm not going to get an offer accepted. Like when the market was crazy hot, it's like you almost like just didn't want to work with contingent buyers because it was like, no one's going to accept it. They're getting 12 offers. Why are they going to take a contingent? That's not the case anymore. I mean, we're looking at days on market going up dramatically. So sellers are getting desperate, and they're like, sure, we'll take a contingent offer, whatever. I actually do have one more point. If you're representing a seller, really important to educate the seller on this whole process. This is really, really important. You need to let the seller know that there is a big risk in doing it. Now, sellers can't be choosers right now. It's funny, the past 7 years, I've been saying buyers can't be choosers. Sellers maybe can't be choosers right now. If they're not getting multiple offers, it's like, well, we got to take a contingent offer, but make sure they are aware about what they are accepting. And one other thing that I do, and you want to be careful to not push too hard on a buyer who's contingent, because if you push too hard and negotiate too hard, they might be like, screw you, I'm not interested. You need me as much as I need you, and they might run. With that said, I like to push the buyer's broker who's going to be listing their home and say, tell me about the home. I already see the address. I looked up the property on Realist. Is it updated? What are you listing at? Now, you can't require them to tell you all that, but I pretty much do. I call up the agent and I say, tell me about this property. I do a quick CMA. I'm like, okay, it looks like that home should sell for around 500. What are you listing at? If they tell me they're listing at 600, I'm not taking a contingent offer. If I think their home's worth 500 and they're listing at 600, it's like, no, thank you. I don't want to be off market for 45 days or contingent for 45 days just to have your home not sell, because I know it's not worth 600. Or at least explain to me, why is it worth way more than what the comps are saying? Is there something I'm missing? Is there a great view that I'm not aware of? So audit the buyer's home if you're representing the seller, right? Make sure that the listing broker is competent and going to pricing the home, going to price the home correctly, so that you're not advising your seller to take an offer that is just not going to come to fruition because the buyer is unreasonable about the home they're selling. I think that's a really important takeaway. Craig taught me that, because when I got into business in 2015, end of 2015, the market was really just crawling out of the recession. So this was really common. And I listened to Craig have these phone calls with people all the time of like, tell me about the home. Is it remodeled? Like really ask questions. So, and he literally did a CMA on any home that he got an offer with the 22B, because he wanted to go to the seller and say, hey, they're listing it at 500 and I think it's right. Or they're listing at 500 and it's really a home that's worth 450. So I don't think you should take this offer, and here's why. So that's what you should be doing for your seller.
And conversely, if you're on the buying side, you want to make your offer look more attractive with the 22B in there. I've seen some of our brokers give examples like, hey, it's in this condo and 2 have just sold in the last month, or, include a CMA in there so that they can see that the property is going to sell.
That is such great advice, Sarah. Yeah, absolutely. If you are writing an offer that's contingent, you're still not, even though the market's changing, you're still not that attractive of a buyer. So make your offer more attractive by saying, here's the home, here's some pictures. I've gotten offers that literally have pictures. They just remodeled the kitchen. Here are the comps. We're listing at this. This home is going to sell, no problem. First weekend, done. So then the listing broker feels very confident accepting this offer. Thank you for saying that. That's great advice. Okay, I think we'll wrap up. Anything else anybody wants to add? Any other questions? Okay, perfect. We'll call it a wrap. Thanks everyone for joining. If you're watching this at a later time, I hope that was helpful. And as always, I don't have the answers to all the questions, but feel free to call me if you have any questions about this, because if we don't have the answer, we can always talk to our attorney in-house. We can find the answers, and it's better to ask a simple question than make a simple mistake. So